Good evening, everyone. I want to thank all of you who were able to join us for this presentation. My name is Franz Gisin, and I want to share with you some of my more memorable photo adventures at one of my favorite go-to locations along the Central California coast, Point Lobos State Natural Reserve. I decided to organize the adventures into the following 8 topics, starting out with some introductory remarks and finishing up with a compilation of a few video clips that did not make it into any of the previous topics, but I felt were still worth sharing. So on that note, let's get started. But first, a little bit about myself. I was born in the city of Basel, in the German-speaking part of Switzerland, and came to America when I was 8 years old. My first visit to Point Lobos occurred in 1969. It was the most memorable year, as I recall, for many other reasons besides Point Lobos. Those of you who, like me, were the first to enter the baby boomer generation will know exactly what I am talking about. After moving down to California, I pursued a master's degree in applied mathematics from Santa Clara University, and then proceeded to spend the next 40-plus years working in assorted fields of electromagnetics here in Silicon Valley. To the right are the 3 equations that I used most during my career. It is worth noting that the third equation, e to the I pi plus 1 equals 0, is considered by many mathematicians to be the most beautiful equation in the world. It was first discovered by Leonhard Euler, who was also born in Basel, Switzerland. Then I retired to devote more time to my favorite hobby. I can still recall my first photography adventure. I was about 10 years old and used my newspaper allowance to buy several rolls of black and white film for my parents' Brownie camera. With loaded camera in hand, I roamed up and down our street, taking impromptu snapshots of all my friends who were playing outside. After each exposure, I proudly opened the back of the Brownie and showed them the film, proving I was not just playing around, but well on my way to becoming a professional photographer. Fortunately, this disastrous oversight is no longer an issue with modern digital cameras. And on that note, let's start concentrating on why we are all here. Point Lobos got its name from the barking of the California sea lions that inhabit the Sea Lion Rocks roughly a half-mile offshore. Here's what the sea lions sound like. Point Lobos is located at the south end of the Monterey Peninsula, about 75 miles from San Jose and 125 miles from San Francisco. The amount of time it takes to get there depends on the traffic in the San Francisco to San Jose metropolitan area, as well as the Monterey Peninsula. I've had cases where I left for Point Lobos from San Jose before breakfast on an off-season, no-holiday Sunday, and managed to get there in about 1 hour and 15 minutes. On the flip side, I recall one time, it was at the end of a long holiday weekend, where it took more than 4 hours to get back home. Because there are lots of other activities to engage in on the Monterey Peninsula, overnight and 2-day weekend sojourns are very popular. Keep in mind that hotel prices can rise sharply over weekends, major holidays, and special events such as golf tournaments and antique auto shows. Point Lobos is not a very big reserve. From one end to the other end is roughly 2 miles, which one can easily walk in a few hours. But as you will see shortly, big surprises often come in small packages, and Point Lobos definitely falls into this category. Park rangers and volunteer naturalists are usually posted at the main entrance, the Whalers Museum, the information station, and many locations along the coast where interesting activities are unfolding. Often there are signs at the entrance that highlight special activities that are occurring on that day. An aerial view of Point Lobos shows that the inland areas are mostly forested, while along the western coastline it's covered with brush and open grassland. Starting at the far north, the 4 most popular coast trails are the Cypress Grove Trail at the north end, the Sand Hill Trail, where a high bluff at the western end is a popular spot for viewing whales and the sea lions after which Point Lobos was named. For both of these, spotting scopes or a good pair of binoculars can greatly enhance the viewing experience. The long South Shoreline Trail passes right by Weston Beach, where tide pooling is a popular activity at low tide. And finally, there's the Bird Island Trail at the far south end where, during breeding season, one can experience up close a large colony of Brandt's cormorants. While none of the trails at Point Lobos are paved, the Sandhill Trail and the Bird Island Trail at the south end are ADA compliant. Other sections, for example, at the tip of the Cypress Grove Trail, are a bit more challenging. A lot of regulars bring along trekking poles to better negotiate the rocks and uneven steps sprinkled throughout this trail. And finally, some trails can get a bit soggy during right after rainy storms, especially in a forested area where the sun cannot dry out the trails too quickly. It's not uncommon, especially after a heavy rainstorm, for the park rangers to close some of the soggier trails. During dangerous high wave activity, some of the coastal access points along the South Shoreline Trail can get closed too. Because Point Lobos is a natural reserve, we need to observe some common sense rules to protect it for future generations of visitors. These include But all is not lost. Cell phones and selfies are still not outlawed. Any use of binoculars, spotting scopes, cameras, and jacket sweaters and long pants are encouraged, even during the summer months. Okay, with these introductory details out of the way, let's get on with the business of focusing on interesting activities we can engage in at Point Lobos. At the beginning of the Sandhill Trail is a large sign that highlights some of the marine wildlife that can be seen along the Point Lobos coastline. As you can probably guess by the title of the sign, Welcome to the Whale Trail, whales are a big draw at Point Lobos, so let's start out with them. Whales and dolphins migrate up and down the coastline, and the two best places to view them are the high bluff on the west end of the Sandhill Trail and the high bluff at the north end of the Cypress Grove Trail. During some years, the whales can come quite close to shore, while in other years they stay much farther out to sea. It takes a great deal of patience to follow whales during their migration, something I don't possess in great quantities. One of the reasons why I prefer photographing the more stationary sea lions on the much closer sea lion rocks. But if you want to give whale watching a try, you can borrow a pair of binoculars from the information station, provided that you leave your car keys as collateral. If you do borrow a set of binoculars, take special note that they need to be returned before 4:30 p.m. Otherwise, your car keys are going to end up at the main entrance station, which is roughly a 3/4 mile hike from the information station where you borrowed the binoculars. If you're the absent-minded sort, bring along a spare set of keys. The southern sea otters are not very big, so again, binoculars, spotting scopes, or cameras equipped with a telephoto lens will greatly enhance the viewing experience. They can usually be found in multiple locations along the coastline, though I don't ever recall them being at all of these locations simultaneously. If you're in the mood to study sea otters, a good pair of walking hiking shoes are recommended. There are only 3 places where I have consistently found harbor seals: Whalers Cove in the upper northeast corner of Point Lobos, Sea Lion Cove along the Sandhill Trail, and China Beach down by Bird Island. Putting it all together, one can see that a hike along the coast almost guarantees that one or more marine animal species can be found in their natural habitat. Over the years, I've collected quite a few video clips of wildlife along the coastal areas of Point Lobos. Here are a few examples. Enjoy. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. A relatively large colony of Brandt's cormorants make their home during the breeding season at the south end on and around Bird Island. During breeding season, their raspy bird calls can easily be heard along the entire southwest end of the Bird Island Trail. Here is a short compilation of video clips that highlights their daily activities a bit closer. Months later, we get a completely different set of circumstances. As you can see from this panorama, the cormorants are all gone. Not one in sight anywhere. Like many other animals at Point Lobos, they are not there 24/7, 365 days each year. At the other end of the park, at the very tip of the Cypress Grove Trail, is the only place I've ever seen a large flock of brown pelicans bed down for the night. The best place to view them is along the north side of the Cypress Grove Trail, where it proceeds down a steep set of rough-hewn granite boulder steps, as can be seen in the small image on the right. It's not easy to negotiate these steps, so the view to the left, across Pinnacle Cove in the direction of Pinnacle Point, as shown in a large image on the left, can easily be overlooked. Even if you pause to marvel at the ever-changing surf, it's difficult to see anything in great detail on Pinnacle Point itself. But bring out the binoculars and suddenly everything changes. With a bit of luck, you'll find a large colony of brown pelicans, spending hours upon countless hours earnestly preening their feathers. Here again is a short set of video clips that highlights this special location with Point Lobos. Now that we are finished with the abundant variety of wildlife we can see along the Point Lobos coastline, let's move on to the next topic. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, has 3 tide classifications. The simplest kind of tide is diurnal, 1 high and 1 low tide every lunar day, which is approximately 24 hours and 50 minutes long. Diurnal tides occur along the Gulf of Mexico. The tide chart below the map is for Pensacola, Florida. Semi-diurnal tides, on the other hand, only occur along the eastern coastline and have 2 high and 2 low tides every tidal day. An important property of semi-diurnal tides is that the tides are roughly equal in size every lunar day. The chart on the right of the map is for Charleston, South Carolina. And finally, we have mixed semi-diurnal tide cycles, which are most prevalent along the west coast. It has 2 highs and 2 lows, just like the East Coast, except that the highs and lows are of a different size. The chart to the left of the map is an example of what the tide looks like at Point Lobos. Because high and low tides can vary quite a bit during a lunar day, we can distinguish them by separating high tides into high and low tides, and similarly the low tides in the high-low and low tides. If all of this sounds a bit confusing, bear with me. It will all make sense shortly. Concentrating on the left chart for the moment, we can see that during the daylight hours on February 18th, 2019, we can experience a substantial high tide at 6.39 feet early in the morning and a very low tide at minus 1.43 feet in the late afternoon. A total difference in height of close to 8 feet. Impressive, to say the least. But compare this to the daytime tide on June 5th, 2020, on the right chart, where the difference between the high and low tides during the day is a paltry 1.64 feet, barely noticeable. Here's an example how different Western Beach looks between the high tide at 8:43 a.m. and the next low tide at 3:56 p.m. on this February 18, 2019 that was mentioned in the previous slide. Clearly, tide pooling is going to be much more productive in the late afternoon. Besides the tides, Point Lobos is also an excellent place to capture some impressive wave action during winter storms. One of the best places is around Sea Lion Rocks, also referred to as the Devil's Cauldron. Here is what Devil's Cauldron looks like from the highest bluff on the Sandhill Trail on a windy day. The probability of finding a whale or dolphin close to shore on this day is pretty low. Another view of Devil's Cauldron, in this case taken from an overlook along the Cypress Grove Trail. And another example, in this case looking northwest from the north end of the Sandhill Trail. But it's not always chaos. On many days, the ocean can appear as calm as a large lake. Here we see a comparison between a relatively calm surf close to the low tide on the left and a more muscular surf closer to the high tide on the right. Like many other places along the California coast, what kind of mood Point Lobos is in can vary considerably from day to day. Again, let's finish off this section with a few short video clips of the large variety of waves that can occur at Point Lobos. Here along the central California coast, it's not uncommon, especially during the summer, for the weatherman to announce patchy coastal fog during the early morning hours. But what does that actually mean in practical terms? Here is an example. I don't know if you noticed it or not, but at the beginning of the Pelican photo shoot at Pinnacle Point earlier in this presentation, the fog was already starting to roll in. In less than 20 minutes, the fog had completely enveloped Pinnacle Point and was getting thicker and thicker by the minute. It was clearly time to pack up the camera gear and start heading back south. By the time I got to one of my favorite photo locations, there was nothing to see. Ditto for the Sea Lion Rocks and Devil's Cauldron. But down towards the south end of Point Lobos, the fog was replaced by a beautiful blue sky. As I was looking at this patch of coastal fog, I began to wonder which way the fog was moving. In, out, or just sitting there, stationary-like. I decided to take a set of time-lapse images and stitch them together into a short video clip. I was so surprised by the answer that I took a few more time lapses to see what else was going on above Point Lobos over the next several months. Here is a compilation of these time lapses. My two favorite botanical delights are the Monterey cypress trees and the spring flowers. Monterey cypress trees only occur at two locations in the world. One is along the ultra-posh 17-mile drive in Carmel. The other is the north end of Point Lobos. This is a view of the Cypress Grove as seen from the north section of the Sandhill Trail across Hetland Cove. Inside the Cypress Grove, things get much spookier. I always thought that this grove would make a perfect background for a scene on a moonlit night in a scary movie. On the back side of the Cypress Grove Trail, the cypress trees are covered with orange-colored algae. A park ranger once told me that this algae does not hurt the trees at all. Of course, springtime is when all the flowers are in full bloom. Here is a compilation of a few short video clips taken over several spring months. One of the advantages of visiting a natural reserve is that we can loosen the reins on our natural curiosities. It's more than just eye candy, a pretty sunset picture, or capturing the instant a sea lion exhales a giant yawn. It's also about understanding why what we are seeing exists in the form that is presented to us. I had just finished taking some photographs of these interesting rock patterns when a couple with a distinctly French accent stopped and asked me what I was photographing. I should note here that one of the more enjoyable aspects of a visit to Point Lobos is the opportunity to meet people from all over the world. I often ask someone with an accent, "Where's your accent from?" The conversation started that's guaranteed to work every time. Europe, Asia, South America, Africa, Australia, they've all been to Point Lobos at one time or another. I even once met two Danish guys who lived in Greenland. And here and there, a visitor will ask me where my accent comes from. I would have thought that living here in America for more than 60 years would have obliterated any remnants of my natural Swiss German language, but apparently that is not the case. Anyway, getting back to the conversation I was having with the French couple, it went something like this. "What were you photographing?" "Those fantastic round geological formations over there," I answered. Then on a whim, I asked them what they thought they were. Their response was immediate and swift. "Why, the fossil remains of gigantic prehistoric sea urchins." My initial reaction was, "Wow, that was quick. I wish I had an imagination that was agile as this." After a pause, they also confessed that they had found a fossilized skull of a prehistoric killer whale. When they noticed that I was intrigued, they volunteered to show me. It was only about a 10-minute walk from where we were standing, and that was good enough for me. I finished packing my camera gear, and off we went. And sure enough, there it was, sitting on a ledge on the other side of Weston Beach. But then I got to thinking, if it truly was a fossil skull of a prehistoric killer whale, then somebody would have already carted it off and safely tucked it into a museum somewhere long before Point Lobos became a natural reserve. I decided to come back after we said our goodbyes and take a closer look with my telephoto lens. Here is what I found later that day. Nothing more than another fantastic geological formation. Which brings us back full circle to our original question, what is going on here? Referring to the geological map of Point Lobos on the right, we can see that it consists of three types of rocks labeled GDP, TC, and QM. I once spent a few hours Googling various geological sites to see if a standardized system was in place to color and label different types of rocks. But this was not meant to be. To this day, I have no idea why the geologist who created this map used these three symbols. At the north and south ends of Point Lobos, the rock consists mostly of gray-colored granite rock. Granite is formed deep underground under high heat and pressure. Analysis of the granite shows it was formed about 60 to 100 million years ago, about the same time as the dinosaurs became extinct. Here are some details of what this granite looks like at the very tip of the Cypress Grove Trail at the north end of the park. The granite has a very rough texture, and I was told by a knowledgeable docent that the larger crystals are feldspar, while the smaller crystals are quartz. In between the two exposed granite extremes lies a conglomerate of granite stones, sandstones, and dark gray siltstone, most of which was formed by ancient submarine canyon landslides. Here is a side view of what one of these canyon landslides looked like. As the rocks and mud in a submerged landslide settle down, the larger, heavier rocks fall faster to the ocean bottom than the lighter rocks and sandstone, hence the non-uniform vertical structure. Here is another example. When a large surf splashes seawater across the irregular surface, it leaves behind small puddles. The salt water in these puddles start to dissolve the minerals in the surface. During the next storm, the seawater washes away the dissolved minerals, leaving a larger depression that can hold more seawater that can dissolve more minerals. Over time, the depression gets larger and larger. In this particular case, the sandstone mudslide gets slowly eroded away, exposing a rocky layer beneath. Here is another example of rock and mud from several submarine landslides. Did anyone notice on the right side of this image the fossil remains of gigantic prehistoric sea urchins that the French pair pointed out earlier in the presentation? I should note that these images of fantastic TC layer rock formations are partially located below nominal sea level at Weston Beach. If you want to study them in greater detail yourselves, then low tide is what you're looking for. And finally, we have the QM layer, a measly 2.6 million years old, still a babe in the woods from a geological standpoint. Sandy soil is not the most stable soil for tall trees to grow in. If you walk along any of the trails that frequent the forested areas, you will see many examples of what a brisk wind can do to trees that grow in this type of soil. Because vegetation covers most of the QM layer, it's hard to see what this layer actually looks like. A better place to see this layer is at Weston Beach. It's the thin frosting of sandy dirt layered on top of the much more complex TC layer directly beneath. During winter storms, the surf can easily reach the QM layer, and because it consists mostly of sand and soil, it is easily eroded. If you look closely at the image of Weston Beach on the right, you can see several places where the QM layer was shored up with rocks to prevent further erosion. So there you have it, a three-layer sandwich of Point Lobos that first came into being 60 to 100 million years ago and is still evolving. Fascinating stuff, all this geological history. And on that note, here are a few video clips that did not make it into any of the previous topics, but were still worth saving. Thank you very much for staying until the very end. I hope you enjoyed viewing this presentation as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Thank you.